Pack up your things. How I got fired at 2:30 a.m. and watched $4. $2 billion disappear by noon. Listen, I'm not the kind of guy who tells stories for sympathy. At 52, I've seen enough corporate bullshit to fill a library. But what happened 3 months ago at Meridian Financial in Chicago? That was different. That was war. My name is Thomas Warren, and for 15 years I was the senior systems architect who kept their trading algorithms humming. While the hotshots in suits collected bonuses for closing deals, I was the invisible guy making sure Tokyo's morning trades didn't crash into London's closing bell. My code wasn't glamorous, but it moved billions without missing a beat. I'd given up everything for that place. Missed my kid Michael's graduation because of a system emergency. Worked through my divorce because the markets never sleep. Even skipped my father's funeral when Singapore had a meltdown that needed my immediate attention. I told myself it mattered, that the sacrifice meant something. Bradley Thornton never saw it that way. Our VP of operations was one of those MBA types who thought experience was just legacy thinking. At 45, he had all the corporate buzzwords but couldn't debug a line of code if his life depended on it. To him, I wasn't a craftsman who'd built something lasting. I was an obstacle to his CEO ambitions. For months, I'd watched him circle like a vulture. He'd bring in consultants to evaluate our operational efficiency. He'd hold meetings about streamlining processes where my 15 years of institutional knowledge got dismissed as resistance to change. The writing was on the wall, but I figured my track record would protect me. 3 years until retirement. I just had to keep my head down. That's why the email hit me like a freight train. 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning marked urgent. Immediate response required. Trading algorithm synchronization directive. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, but for once in 15 years, I didn't wake up. The Ambien had finally won. By 8:47 a.m., I was sitting in HR with my badge already deactivated and a termination letter with yesterday's date. Bradley stood there in his $1,000 suit, each word clipped and rehearsed. You failed to respond to a critical directive. This kind of negligence puts the entire firm at risk. The irony burned. 15 years of perfect response times, and the one night I slept through an email became my execution. But here's what really twisted the knife. The paperwork was already printed. The decision had been made before I ever failed to respond. I'd been set up, and we both knew it. Walking out of that building felt like a death march. 15 years of my life reduced to a cardboard box and a security escort. My team, guys I'd mentored, taught everything they knew, couldn't even look me in the eye. I got it. Mortgages, kids, college funds. Nobody wanted to be next on Bradley's hit list. But Kyle Rodriguez was different. 28 years old, sharp as hell, and the closest thing to a son I had at work. As security walked me past his desk, he slipped me something. A folded piece of paper, quick as a pickpocket. The system remembers everything, he whispered without looking up from his screen. I didn't open it until I reached Murphy's Pub 3 blocks away. The place was nearly empty at 10 in the morning. Just a few day drinkers and the bartender who'd seen better decades. My hands were shaking as I unfolded Kyle's note. Check the compliance logs. Bradley's override signature is all over the 2:30 a.m. directive. The bastard signed your name to it. My blood went cold. That email wasn't just a trap, it was forgery. Bradley had used my administrative credentials to push through a directive that violated every protocol I'd spent years building. Then he sat back and waited for me to fail to respond to his own illegal command. I pulled out my laptop right there in the bar, hands trembling with rage. My access should have been killed, but Kyle was right. The system remembered everything. Deep in the architecture I'd built was a hidden compliance monitoring protocol, something I'd coded years ago as insurance against exactly this kind of corporate backstabbing. There it was, clear as daylight in the audit trail. Override authorization, T. Warren, executed by B. Thornton 022743. The smoking gun time-stamped and logged. Bradley had committed fraud using my credentials, then fired me for not responding to his own fabricated emergency. The bartender asked if I wanted another beer. I'd already finished 3 without realizing it. The alcohol was mixing with 15 years of suppressed anger, creating a cocktail of rage that made my vision blur. Instead of staying cool and planning my next move strategically, I let emotion take the wheel. I drove straight back to Meridian's parking garage and waited. When Bradley strutted out at 6 p.m., still basking in his victory, still wearing that smug smile that said he'd gotten away with it, I couldn't contain myself anymore. "Enjoy the fraud charges," I said, shoving printouts of the logs in his face. My system caught every keystroke, you piece of garbage. The security cameras are going to love watching you try to explain this to federal investigators. Bradley's smug smile faltered for about 2 seconds. Then it came back twice as wide. Thomas Warren threatening me in a parking garage? How's that going to look on the security cameras? Bradley's voice was calm, almost amused. You're making this too easy for me, Tom. That's when I realized I'd just blown my advantage. The cameras captured everything. Me looking unhinged, him playing the victim. Worse, I'd shown my hand. He now knew about the compliance logs, knew what evidence I had, and had time to prepare his defense. Within 48 hours, Bradley's counterattack began. Suddenly, I was a disgruntled former employee making terroristic threats. A private investigator started calling my neighbors in Oak Park, asking about my mental state and financial difficulties. Stories leaked to the Chicago Tribune about system sabotage and insider trading investigations. The bastard was trying to destroy me before I could destroy him. I needed help, and there was only one person who knew where all the bodies were buried. Dick Patterson, my old department head. Dick had retired 6 months earlier after 35 years at Meridian. He'd been my mentor, my protector, the guy who taught me everything about navigating corporate politics while keeping your integrity intact. But when I called him, desperate and running out of options, Dick's voice went cold. Tom, I can't get involved in this. My pension doesn't vest for another 4 months. Nancy's medical bills are bleeding us dry, and if Meridian decides to review my retirement package... He trailed off, but I heard the fear. I'm sorry, son. I really am, but I've got 6 grandkids to think about. I understood, but it still felt like a knife in the back. Dick had the institutional knowledge to back up my claims. He knew about Bradley's pattern of pushing through questionable trades, about the compliance shortcuts, about the political maneuvering that had gotten me axed. Without him, I was just another bitter ex-employee with a grudge. My son, Michael, called that evening from his apartment in Lincoln Park. Dad, what the hell is going on? My boss is asking questions about you. There are reporters calling the office. He sounded tired, older than his 24 years. I need to know if any of this stuff about sabotage is true. The doubt in his voice cut deeper than Bradley's betrayal. My own kid was wondering if his father was a criminal. I tried to explain about the fraud, about Bradley's manipulation, about the evidence I'd uncovered. But all he heard was that his dad was at the center of a corporate scandal that was threatening his own career at a competing firm. Maybe you should just let it go, Dad. Start over somewhere else. This fight isn't worth destroying both our lives over. But I couldn't let it go. Not when I was right. Not when I had proof. While I was begging old mentors for help and watching my relationship with my son deteriorate, Bradley was busy spinning his narrative. The Chicago Business Journal ran a piece about modernization efforts at Meridian, painting my firing as part of streamlining legacy operations. Anonymous sources, clearly Bradley's people, described me as resistant to change and potentially unstable. The private investigator Bradley hired was thorough. I'll give him that. Within a week, neighbors were getting calls asking about my drinking habits, my financial situation, whether I'd seemed angry or erratic lately. The guy even contacted my ex-wife in Arizona, fishing for dirt about our divorce 8 years ago. Bradley's real masterpiece came when he leaked a story to the Tribune about a disgruntled systems architect who might have sabotaged Meridian's trading platforms before his termination. The article didn't name me directly, but anyone in the Chicago financial community could connect the dots. Suddenly, I wasn't just unemployed, I was radioactive. But Bradley had made one crucial mistake. His fraudulent directive wasn't just sitting in some hidden log file. It was actively corrupting the trading system in real time. On Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after my termination, the trading algorithms started showing stress fractures. Nothing dramatic at first, just tiny timing discrepancies that most people wouldn't notice. Millisecond delays, that shouldn't matter in normal circumstances. Except in algorithmic trading, milliseconds are lifetimes, and I designed those systems to be incredibly sensitive to timing irregularities. One small hiccup cascades into bigger problems, and bigger problems spiral into complete system failure. It's a feature, not a bug. Better to shut down gracefully than execute bad trades that could bankrupt clients. Kyle texted me updates throughout the day. Asian markets closing with errors. European session showing lag. Tom, it's falling apart exactly like you always warned it would. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Bradley's 2:30 a.m. directive, the fraudulent one that got me fired, had introduced a timing conflict into the core synchronization protocol. My system was trying to execute trades according to parameters that made no mathematical sense. It was like asking a calculator to divide by 0 over and over again. By Friday afternoon, the cascade was unstoppable. Trade confirmations were bouncing back from exchanges. Settlement systems were rejecting transactions. The compliance algorithms I'd built to catch irregularities were now catching everything because everything was irregular. I sat in my living room watching Bloomberg News report on technical difficulties at Meridian Financial. The talking heads used words like temporary disruption and minor adjustments, but I could read between the lines. This wasn't a glitch. This was systematic collapse. My landline rang at 11 p.m. Dick Patterson's name on the caller ID. Tom, Dick's voice was different now. Older, scared. My pension just vested this morning. Early release due to health concerns. He paused, and I could hear him breathing heavily. Nancy's been telling me for weeks that I'm a coward. She's right. When can we meet? The cavalry was finally coming, but I wondered if it would be too late. We met Saturday morning at a diner in Elmhurst, halfway between our suburban homes. Dick looked like he'd aged 5 years in the 6 months since retirement. His hair was completely gray now, and there were worry lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. I've been thinking about what you said, Tom, about Bradley's pattern of behavior. He stirred his coffee absently. I kept quiet about things I should have reported. Trades that didn't make sense. Override commands that bypassed risk management protocols. I told myself it wasn't my job to police every decision, that I was just months away from retirement. Dick pulled out a manila envelope thick with documents, but I kept copies of everything. Every questionable directive, every compliance shortcut, every time Bradley pressured the trading desk to execute orders that violated our own risk parameters. I never thought I'd need them, but the evidence was damning. Dozens of instances over the past 2 years where Bradley had pushed through trades that should have been flagged by compliance systems. Pattern recognition reports showing suspicious timing on derivative purchases that coincided with his access to confidential client information. Risk assessment overrides that had cost the firm millions in exposure. This is securities fraud, Dick. Multiple counts. Why didn't you report this when it happened? He looked older than his 59 years. Because I'm a coward, Tom. Because I had 18 months left until full pension, and Nancy's cancer treatments were costing us everything insurance wouldn't cover. Because I convinced myself that keeping my head down and protecting my family was more important than doing the right thing. The guilt in his voice was palpable, but here's what really sealed it for me. Dick had kept meticulous records of every conversation with Bradley, including recorded phone calls where Bradley explicitly instructed him to ignore compliance protocols. One recording in particular made my blood boil. Bradley's voice, clear as day. Dick, I need you to process these trades without running them through risk assessment. If Warren's systems flag them, tell him they're pre-approved executive orders. We can't let his overcautious algorithms kill deals that could make us millions. There it was, proof that Bradley had been systematically bypassing the safety systems I'd built, using Dick as an unwilling accomplice. No wonder the timing conflicts in my code had finally reached a breaking point. By Monday morning, the financial press was calling it Black Monday Redux. By Monday morning, the cascade failure reached critical mass. What started as timing discrepancies had metastasized into complete system paralysis. Trading algorithms that should have processed thousands of transactions per second were stuck in infinite loops, trying to reconcile Bradley's impossible directive with mathematical reality. I watched the carnage unfold from my kitchen table, laptop open to news feeds and trading dashboards. At 9:47 a.m. Eastern, Meridian's high-frequency trading desk went dark. By 10:15, their options market-making operation had ceased functioning. Settlement systems that handled billions in daily transactions were spitting out error codes I'd programmed to prevent exactly this scenario. The irony was brutal. My safety protocols, designed to shut down gracefully when detecting fraud or corruption, were working perfectly. The system was protecting itself from Bradley's contaminated directive by refusing to process anything that touched the compromised synchronization protocol, which unfortunately was everything. Kyle sent me real-time updates from inside the building, emergency meetings on every floor, phones ringing nonstop. Bradley's running around like a chicken with his head cut off, screaming about legacy system failures and sabotage. The media picked up the story by noon. CNBC ran a breaking news banner, Meridian Financial experiences major trading system outage. Bloomberg reported billions in delayed transactions and regulatory scrutiny expected. But they were still treating it like a technical glitch, not understanding the true scope of what was happening. Because this wasn't just about Meridian anymore. Our algorithms connected to dozens of other financial institutions through interdealer networks. When our system started rejecting trades, it created a bottleneck that backed up across the entire Chicago trading ecosystem. Settlement delays at Meridian meant payment delays for pension funds, hedge funds, and international banks that relied on our infrastructure. By 2 p.m., the damage estimate hit $4.2 billion in frozen or failed transactions. 28,000 jobs across the financial district were affected as trading desks shut down operations rather than risk executing trades through unstable systems. The Chicago Mercantile Exchange issued a rare advisory warning about technical difficulties with major market participants. Dick Patterson called me at 3:17 p.m., his voice shaking. "Tom, I just got off the phone with my contact at the SEC. They've launched an emergency investigation. The automated compliance system you built? It's been sending violation reports to federal regulators since Thursday. Every irregular transaction, every protocol breach, every piece of evidence about Bradley's fraud, it's all sitting in some federal database with timestamps and digital signatures. My hidden insurance policy had worked exactly as designed. For years, I'd embedded automated regulatory reporting into the deepest layers of the trading system. If anyone tried to manipulate trades or bypass compliance protocols, the system would immediately alert the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'd never told Bradley about this feature because I'd never told anyone about it. The compliance monitoring system was my nuclear option, embedded so deep in the code architecture that removing it would require rebuilding the entire trading platform from scratch. Every override, every suspicious transaction, every protocol violation was automatically documented and transmitted to federal regulators in real time. Now that hidden fail-safe was Bradley's death sentence. The SEC had real-time documentation of his fraudulent directive, complete with metadata proving he'd used my credentials to authorize trades that violated federal regulations. They had evidence of the cascade failure his manipulation had caused. They had everything. But as I sat there watching billions disappear in real time, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. Winning this war was going to cost more than I'd ever imagined. The phone calls started Tuesday morning. First, it was Jennifer Walsh from the Chicago Tribune's financial desk. Then reporters from the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, even CNN's business unit. Everyone wanted to know about the mysterious systems architect whose code had brought down one of Chicago's largest trading firms. Some of the coverage was sympathetic. The Tribune ran a piece titled "The Whistleblower Who Saved Chicago," painting me as a principled engineer who'd exposed massive fraud. But other outlets focused on the economic damage. 28,000 people out of work. Pension funds frozen. Retirement accounts locked up for weeks while regulators sorted through the mess. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, no relation to Dick, cornered me at the mailbox Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was cold, accusatory. "My daughter works at Harris Bank. She's been laid off because of your little revenge scheme. I hope you're proud of yourself." The guilt hit harder than I expected. These weren't abstract numbers on a screen. They were real people whose lives had been disrupted because I'd built systems that chose integrity over convenience. Children whose college funds were temporarily frozen. Retirees whose monthly checks had been delayed. Small business owners who couldn't access credit lines because their bank's trading partnerships with Meridian had been suspended. Kyle called me Wednesday morning, his voice tight with stress. "Tom, Bradley's losing his mind. He's called 3 emergency meetings since yesterday, screaming about sabotage and terrorism. He's trying to get IT to trace the compliance reports back to you, but the system architecture is too complex. He's hired a team of outside consultants to find a way to blame this on you personally." The desperation in Bradley's actions was almost comical. He was drowning, grasping for any lifeline that might save his career. But the beautiful thing about automated systems is that they don't lie. Every log entry, every timestamp, every digital signature was mathematically verifiable. You can't spin mathematics. Still, I knew Bradley wouldn't go down without a fight. Thursday brought federal agents to Meridian's offices. Not the discreet investigation I'd expected, but a full-scale raid with warrant papers and evidence boxes. Kyle texted me photos from across the street. FBI and SEC investigators carrying out servers, boxes of documents, and sealed evidence bags. Bradley's response was predictably desperate. That afternoon, his lawyers held a press conference on the steps of the Dirksen Federal Building. Bradley stood behind them, looking haggard but defiant, as his lead attorney painted me as a disgruntled employee who'd sabotaged critical financial infrastructure out of personal spite. Mr. Warren built back doors into Meridian's trading system specifically to cause maximum damage when terminated, the lawyer claimed. This was a premeditated attack on the stability of Chicago's financial markets, orchestrated by a man who put personal revenge above the welfare of thousands of innocent employees and investors. It was a clever strategy. Admit that the systems had been compromised, but blame the architect rather than the executive who'd corrupted them. Paint me as a cyber terrorist instead of a whistleblower. The narrative almost worked until Dick Patterson stepped forward. Friday morning, Dick held his own press conference, flanked by his attorney and a representative from the SEC's Whistleblower Protection Program. His voice was steady as he read from a prepared statement, but I could see his hands shaking slightly. I'm here today to provide testimony about systematic compliance violations at Meridian Financial under the direction of VP Bradley Thornton. For 2 years, I documented instances where Mr. Thornton ordered trading desk personnel to bypass risk management protocols designed by Thomas Warren. I have recordings of conversations where Mr. Thornton explicitly instructed staff to ignore compliance safeguards. Dick held up a USB drive. This contains 47 recorded conversations, internal memos, and trading records that prove Mr. Thornton's pattern of regulatory violations. Mr. Warren's systems didn't fail. They performed exactly as designed when they detected this systematic fraud. The press conference was a masterclass in calm, factual testimony. Dick laid out the timeline methodically. Bradley's arrival at Meridian 3 years ago, the gradual erosion of compliance protocols, the pressure on technical staff to disable safety features, and finally the fraudulent directive that triggered the system's defensive shutdown. But Bradley wasn't finished. His final desperate move came that evening when his private investigator released what he claimed were my personal financial records, suggesting I'd been planning this sabotage for months while secretly shorting Meridian's stock. The records were fabricated, of course, but convincing enough to plant doubt. Suddenly my motivation wasn't whistleblowing, it was insider trading. The narrative shifted again. I hadn't just sabotaged the system out of spite, I'd profited from the chaos I'd created. My phone rang at midnight. My son Michael's name on the caller ID. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Michael's voice was strained, tired. Did you know this would happen when you built those systems? Did you want it to happen? The question hit harder than any corporate backstabbing I'd endured. My own kid was wondering if his father was a saboteur. I tried to explain about safety protocols and fraud prevention, about the importance of system integrity over profit margins. But all he heard was that his dad's code had crashed the Chicago financial markets. I've been getting calls all week, Dad. Reporters, investigators, people from my company asking about our family connection. My manager thinks it would be better if there was some distance between our names for a while. He paused, and I could hear the pain in his voice. I'm getting transferred to the Denver office. The weight of those words settled on my chest like concrete. My fight for justice was costing my son his career in Chicago, forcing him to relocate because of the scandal surrounding our shared last name. I love you, Dad, but this is my career too. The line went quiet for a long moment. I hope it was worth it. After he hung up, I sat in my empty house wondering if anything was worth destroying your relationship with your child. The federal investigation was proceeding, the evidence was overwhelming, and Bradley would likely face serious prison time. But victory felt hollow when it came at the cost of driving away the person who mattered most. Saturday brought unexpected vindication. The SEC released a preliminary report that cleared me of any wrongdoing and confirmed that the trading system collapse was caused by fraudulent directives that violated federal securities regulations. More importantly, their forensic analysis proved that the fabricated financial records Bradley's team had released were completely false. The commission's statement was unambiguous. Mr. Warren's compliance monitoring systems performed exactly as designed when they detected systematic fraud. The automated shutdown protocols prevented significantly greater financial damage by stopping compromised trades before they could propagate throughout the broader financial network. Kyle called that afternoon with news from inside Meridian. Bradley's been suspended pending federal charges. The board voted no confidence yesterday. Security escorted him out this morning, and there are rumors about criminal prosecution for securities fraud, computer tampering, and identity theft. The end game was finally approaching, but I knew the real test wasn't Bradley's downfall. It was whether I could rebuild the relationships his manipulation had damaged. Sunday evening, Dick Patterson knocked on my door. He looked older but more at peace than I'd seen him in months. Nancy wants to invite you for dinner next week, he said. She says it's time we stopped being cowards and started supporting the people who do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Monday morning brought the news I'd been waiting for. Federal agents arrested Bradley Thornton at his Lincoln Park home at 6 a.m. The charges read like a white-collar crime greatest hits album: securities fraud, computer tampering, falsification of trading records, identity theft for using my credentials, and conspiracy to manipulate financial markets. The Chicago Tribune's front page showed Bradley doing the perp walk, his $1,000 suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled. 3 weeks earlier, he'd been positioning himself for a CEO promotion. Now he was facing 20 years in federal prison and a lifetime ban from the financial industry. Kyle sent me photos from inside Meridian as FBI agents carried out more evidence boxes. The trading floor that had been Bradley's kingdom was now a crime scene, sealed off with yellow tape while forensic accountants analyzed every transaction from the past 2 years. Dick Patterson testified before the federal grand jury Tuesday morning, his 35 years of institutional knowledge finally put to good use. Kyle Rodriguez provided technical testimony that sealed Bradley's fate, explaining in precise detail how the fraudulent directive had cascaded into system-wide failure. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and beautifully documented by the very compliant systems Bradley had tried to circumvent. I should have felt triumphant. Justice served, truth vindicated, the good guys winning for once. But victory came with a price tag I hadn't anticipated. The media attention made me radioactive in Chicago's tight-knit financial community. Sure, I was the whistleblower who exposed massive fraud, but I was also the guy whose systems had frozen $4.2 billion and cost thousands of people their jobs. Pension funds that couldn't process trades during the crisis. Retirement accounts locked up for weeks. Small traders who lost fortunes because they couldn't exit positions. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, stopped speaking to me entirely after her daughter lost her job at Harris Bank. The grocery store clerk, who'd always been friendly, started avoiding eye contact. Even my barber made uncomfortable small talk about finding a new place to get my hair cut, somewhere the other customers wouldn't recognize me. The financial press tried to paint me as a hero, but ordinary people saw something different. They saw a guy whose personal vendetta had cost them their livelihoods, their security, their faith in the system that was supposed to protect their investments. Jennifer Walsh from the Tribune called Wednesday evening with an offer I couldn't refuse. We want to do a full feature story about your side of this. Let you tell the real story about what Bradley did, how the system was supposed to work, why the safeguards you built were necessary. I agreed to the interview, but I knew it wouldn't change the fundamental reality. Being right doesn't erase the collateral damage. Exposing corruption doesn't heal the wounds it leaves behind. 3 months later, I accepted a consulting position with a Denver-based fintech startup called Apex Securities. The salary was 30% less than Meridian had paid me, but it was honest work building fraud-resistant trading platforms for smaller regional banks. The irony wasn't lost on me. My reputation as the guy who'd brought down a corrupt VP had made me unemployable at established firms, but invaluable to companies that wanted bulletproof compliance systems. The move to Denver was harder than I'd expected. Selling the house in Oak Park, packing up 15 years of memories, starting over in a city where nobody knew my name or my story. But it was also liberating. For the first time in decades, I could walk into a grocery store without seeing judgment in people's eyes. Michael and I talked every Sunday now, our relationship slowly healing. He'd settled into his new role in Denver's financial district, and we'd even had lunch a few times. The geographical distance had somehow made emotional closeness possible again. "Dad, I need to tell you something," he said during one of our calls. "I was angry for a long time about what happened. But my new boss here, he knows the whole story. He says what you did took guts, and that the financial industry needs more people willing to put integrity before convenience." Those words meant more to me than any vindication from federal prosecutors. Dick Patterson and I meet for coffee every few weeks now when I'm back in Chicago visiting. He retired with his full pension and Nancy's medical bills covered. Kyle got promoted to senior systems architect at Meridian. They needed someone who understood my code to rebuild what Bradley had broken. He sends me pictures of the new compliance dashboard he's built, incorporating lessons learned from our disaster. As for Bradley, his trial made national news. 22 years in federal prison, plus full restitution for the financial damages his fraud had caused. His wife divorced him before the sentencing, taking half of everything that hadn't been seized by federal asset forfeiture. His political connections evaporated the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. Last I heard, he was working in the prison laundry while his lawyers appealed his conviction. The federal prosecutor told reporters that Bradley's case would serve as a deterrent to other executives who thought they could manipulate financial systems for personal gain. Sometimes people ask me if it was worth it. Losing my home city, damaging my relationship with my son, watching thousands of innocent people suffer because I'd built systems that chose integrity over convenience. The answer isn't simple. Justice isn't free, and principles aren't profitable. 28,000 people lost jobs because of the chaos my systems prevented and created. Pension funds were disrupted. Small investors suffered losses. The collateral damage was real, and I carry that responsibility. But when I look at myself in the mirror, I see a man who refused to let corruption win, even when winning meant losing everything else. I see someone who built systems strong enough to protect themselves from the very people who tried to corrupt them. Bradley Thornton destroyed lives for personal advancement. My systems stopped him from destroying even more. Sometimes that has to be enough.